In a small town surrounded by green hills and winding rivers, there stood an old hotel that had been around for decades. The building was charming in its own way, with creaky wooden floors, faded wallpaper, and a grand staircase that whispered stories of the past. It wasn't fancy or modern, but it had character, and for years it served as a cozy stop for travelers passing through. The owner of the hotel was a man named Harrison. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and always dressed in pressed suits that didn't quite match his gruff personality. Harrison wasn't known for being friendly or approachable. Instead, he ruled the hotel with an iron fist. His voice boomed down the hallways, barking orders at staff and scolding anyone who dared make a mistake. Most people avoided crossing paths with him if they could help it. Among the employees, one person bore the brunt of Harrison's harshness more than anyone else, an elderly janitor who had worked at the hotel for over 20 years. This man was quiet, gentle, and carried himself with dignity despite the challenges life had thrown his way. Every morning, he arrived before sunrise, ready to sweep the floors, polish the furniture, and ensure the hotel looked presentable for guests. Despite his age, he moved with purpose, determined to do his job well. But no matter how hard he worked, it never seemed to satisfy Harrison. "You call this clean?" Harrison would snap, pointing at invisible specks of dust on the counter. Or, "What's taking you so long? A child could do your job faster." These comments stung, especially when they came out of nowhere, often in front of guests or other employees. Yet, the janitor never argued back. He simply lowered his head, muttered a soft apology, and continued working. This pattern had gone on for years, wearing down the janitor bit by bit. At first, he tried to brush off the insults, telling himself it was just Harrison's nature to be rude. But after 2 decades of enduring such treatment, it became harder to ignore. Some days, he felt like quitting, to walk away and never look back. But he couldn't. He needed the job to survive. With no family left and limited options at his age, leaving wasn't a choice he could afford to make. What made things worse was that Harrison didn't treat everyone the same way. Younger workers, particularly those who were white, rarely faced his wrath. They might get reprimanded occasionally, but it was nothing compared to what the janitor endured daily. Guests noticed this disparity too. Some even commented on how unfairly Harrison behaved toward the older man, though none stepped forward to intervene. After all, Harrison was the boss, and speaking up might mean risking their stay at the hotel, or worse. Despite everything, the janitor kept showing up. Every day, he took pride in keeping the hotel tidy, even if no one appreciated his efforts. There was something comforting about routine, about knowing exactly where each broom and mop belonged, and deep down, he hoped that maybe, just maybe, things would improve someday. Little did he know, change was closer than he thought. One crisp autumn morning, as golden leaves swirled outside the hotel doors, fate decided to pay a visit. Unbeknownst to the janitor, someone new had checked into the hotel, a guest unlike any other. This visitor wouldn't just pass through. Quietly, he would leave an indelible mark on the lives of everyone inside those walls. For now, though, the janitor remained unaware, focused on sweeping the lobby floor as usual, while Harrison glared from across the room. The morning air was crisp, and the hotel lobby smelled faintly of pine cleaner as the janitor worked his way across the tiled floor. His hands moved steadily, pushing the mop in rhythmic circles. The quiet rhythm of his work offered a small sense of peace, even though he could feel Harrison's eyes boring into him from behind the front desk. It wasn't unusual for Harrison to hover like that, watching every move with a critical glare, ready to pounce on any perceived mistake. Today, however, something felt different. There was an energy in the air, a subtle shift that made the janitor glance up more often than usual. The hotel wasn't particularly busy. Only a handful of guests were checking in or out. But there was a buzz among the staff. Whispers floated through the hallways about a new guest who had arrived late the previous night. No one knew much about him yet, except that he carried himself with confidence and tipped generously. For employees used to Harrison's penny-pinching ways, this alone was enough to spark curiosity. As the janitor finished mopping near the entrance, the glass doors swung open, letting in a gust of cool wind. A man stepped inside, pulling a suitcase behind him. At first glance, he looked like any other traveler. Casual clothes, sunglasses perched on his head, and a distracted expression as he scanned the lobby. But then the janitor froze, his mop, handle slipping slightly in his grip. He recognized the face instantly. It was Sylvester Stallone. Stallone glanced around the room, taking in the worn furniture and peeling paint. He didn't seem bothered by the hotel's outdated charm. Instead, he smiled warmly at the receptionist before turning his attention to the janitor. "Morning," he said, his voice deep and friendly. The janitor blinked, unsure how to respond. Famous actors didn't usually stroll into places like this, let alone greet the cleaning staff. Good morning," he stammered, clutching the mop tighter. For a moment, Stallone lingered, studying the janitor's weathered face and the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of years of hard labor. "You've been here a while, huh?" Stallone asked casually. The question caught the janitor off guard. "Yes, sir," he replied softly. "Been working here. A long time." Stallone nodded thoughtfully, then surprised everyone by rolling up his sleeves. "Mind if I lend a hand?" he offered, gesturing toward the mop. The janitor hesitated, unsure whether to accept help from a celebrity. But Stallone didn't wait for permission. He grabbed another mop leaning against the wall and began helping without hesitation. Word spread quickly among the staff. By lunchtime, nearly everyone knew that Sylvester Stallone was pitching in with the cleaning duties. Some employees peeked out from the kitchen or peeked around corners, marveling at the sight of the action star scrubbing floors alongside the elderly janitor. Even Harrison emerged from his office, his usual scowl replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. "What are you doing?" he demanded, his tone sharp but tinged with nervousness. Stallone straightened up, wiping sweat from his brow. "Just helping out," he said with a shrug. "Looks like this guy's got his hands full." Harrison forced a laugh, clearly uncomfortable. "Oh, we don't expect our guests to do manual labor. Please, let us take care of it." Stallone raised an eyebrow, sensing the tension simmering beneath Harrison's words. "Don't worry about it," he replied smoothly. "I'm enjoying myself." Then, lowering his voice so only the janitor could hear, he added, "Besides, I think your team deserves a break." That evening, after most of the guests had retired to their rooms, Stallone sought out the janitor again. He found him in a dimly lit corner of the lobby organizing cleaning supplies. "Hey," Stallone said, pulling up a chair. "Got a minute?" The janitor nodded cautiously, setting down the bottle of polish he'd been holding. Stallone leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Look, I couldn't help noticing how you're treated around here. Care to tell me what's going on?" At first, the janitor hesitated. Talking about his struggles felt risky, especially when Harrison might overhear. But there was something trustworthy about Stallone's demeanor. His calm presence and genuine interest put the janitor at ease. Slowly, he began to speak. He talked about the long hours, the constant criticism, and the feeling of being invisible despite decades of service. Stallone listened intently, his jaw tightening as the story unfolded. When the janitor mentioned how Harrison had recently hired someone younger to replace him, Stallone's eyes narrowed. "That's not right," he said firmly. "No one deserves to be treated like that." The janitor shrugged, trying to downplay the pain in his voice. "It's just the way things are, I guess." Stallone shook his head. "Not on my watch," he muttered under his breath. Though the janitor didn't catch the remark, he noticed the resolve in Stallone's expression. Whatever the actor was thinking, it was clear he wasn't going to let the matter drop. By the time they finished talking, the lobby was nearly empty. The janitor thanked Stallone for listening, still unsure what, if anything, the actor planned to do. But as Stallone stood up to leave, he placed a reassuring hand on the janitor's shoulder. "Don't worry," he said with a confident smile. "We'll figure this out together." With those words, Stallone walked away, leaving the janitor both hopeful and anxious. Change was coming, whether Harrison liked it or not. And for the first time in years, the janitor allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. The next morning, the hotel buzzed with an unusual energy. Guests whispered to each other over breakfast, glancing toward the lobby where Sylvester Stallone had been seen helping the elderly janitor the day before. Even the staff couldn't stop talking about it. In a place where monotony ruled and Harrison's harsh demeanor kept everyone walking on eggshells, this was something completely out of the ordinary. For once, people weren't just discussing room bookings or complaints. They were wondering what Stallone might do next. Harrison, however, wasn't amused. He paced his office like a caged animal, muttering under his breath. The idea of his guests mingling with the help and worse, doing their work was infuriating to him. To make matters worse, he couldn't shake the feeling that Stallone was up to something. Why would a world-famous actor care so much about some old janitor? It didn't add up in Harrison's mind, and that uncertainty made him uneasy. Meanwhile, Stallone had already started making plans. He knew he couldn't fix everything overnight, but he also understood the power of visibility. If Harrison thought no one cared about how he treated his employees, then maybe it was time to show him otherwise. That afternoon, Stallone called a local news station from his hotel room. "Listen," he said when the reporter answered. "I'm at this hotel, and there's a story here worth telling. A man who's worked here for decades is being mistreated, and I think people need to hear about it." The reporter, intrigued by the call, agreed to send a crew first thing the following day. When the janitor arrived for his shift that evening, he found Stallone waiting for him near the supply closet. "How are you holding up?" Stallone asked, his tone warm but serious. The janitor shrugged, trying to mask his anxiety. "I don't know what'll happen if Mr. Harrison finds out we've been talking," he admitted quietly. Stallone nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Don't worry about him," he said firmly. "This isn't just your fight anymore, it's mine too. And trust me, I've dealt with bigger bullies than him." Stallone went on to explain his plan. The news crew would come tomorrow to document the situation. They'd interview the janitor, speak to other employees, and capture footage of the hotel's inner workings. At first, the janitor hesitated. The thought of cameras turning their lenses on him felt overwhelming. What if it backfired? What if Harrison retaliated even harder? Sensing his fear, Stallone leaned in closer. "Look," he said gently. "You've spent years putting up with things you shouldn't have. You deserve justice, plain and simple. Let me help you get it." By the time they finished talking, the janitor's resolve had strengthened. There was something about Stallone's unwavering confidence that made him feel less alone. Maybe this really could be the moment things changed, not just for him, but for others who had suffered in silence. The next morning, the hotel came alive with activity. A van emblazoned with the logo of the local news station pulled into the driveway, drawing curious stares from both guests and staff. Inside, reporters unloaded equipment while cameramen adjusted tripods and microphones. Word spread quickly, and soon everyone gathered in the lobby to see what was happening. Harrison emerged from his office, his face flushed with anger. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked, glaring at Stallone, who stood calmly beside the janitor. "This is about fairness," Stallone replied, his voice steady and commanding. "People need to know how you treat those who work for you." Before Harrison could respond, the lead reporter stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Sir, can you tell us why our team is here today?" she asked, addressing Stallone directly. Without missing a beat, Stallone gestured toward the janitor. This man has dedicated his life to keeping this hotel running smoothly. Yet instead of gratitude, he faces disrespect and abuse from his employer. That's not okay, and it needs to change. As the cameras rolled, the janitor spoke haltingly at first, his voice barely above a whisper. But as he recounted years of unfair treatment, the insults, the demotions, the constant belittling, he grew more confident. Tears welled in his eyes, but he pressed on, determined to share his truth. Other employees chimed in too, describing similar experiences with Harrison. One housekeeper talked about being scolded for taking a 5-minute break. Another mentioned how her paychecks often came late. The weight of their collective grievances hung heavy in the air. Harrison tried to interrupt, sputtering excuses and denials, but no one listened. His usual bravado crumbled under the scrutiny of the cameras. For the first time, he looked small, like a man cornered by the consequences of his actions. As the interviews wrapped up, Stallone addressed the crowd. "Everyone deserves respect," he said, his words ringing clear. "No job is too small to matter, and no person should ever be treated as if they're invisible." By the end of the day, the story had gained traction online. Clips of the interview went viral, sparking outrage and support from viewers across the country. Calls flooded the hotel, demanding accountability from Harrison. Local authorities even announced they would investigate labor practices at the property. For the janitor, it was surreal to see strangers rallying behind him. After decades of feeling powerless, he finally felt seen and heard. But the real test was yet to come. Would Harrison change his ways, or would he dig in deeper? And what role would Stallone continue to play in ensuring justice was served? The days that followed felt like a storm brewing. The hotel, once quiet and unremarkable, had become the center of attention, not just in the small town but far beyond. Social media was ablaze with posts about the elderly janitor's story. People shared clips of Stallone speaking passionately about fairness and respect. Some praised him for stepping in, while others criticized Harrison for his treatment of employees. The pressure mounted, and it was clear that Harrison couldn't ignore it anymore. Harrison, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat. Instead, he doubled down on his usual tactics, blustering, deflecting, and trying to regain control of the narrative. He called an emergency meeting with the staff, ordering everyone to gather in the dining hall after their shifts ended. When the room filled with nervous faces, he stood at the front, arms crossed, glaring at each person as if daring them to say something against him. "I don't know what lies you've been spreading," he began, his voice sharp and accusatory. "But let me make one thing clear. I run this hotel, and I won't tolerate anyone undermining my authority." His eyes landed on the janitor, who sat quietly near the back of the room. "You think bringing in cameras and celebrities is going to change how things work around here? Think again." The janitor kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. He knew better than to respond directly. It would only give Harrison more ammunition. But sitting there, surrounded by colleagues who now understood his struggles, he didn't feel as alone as he used to. The weight of years of mistreatment still lingered, but it no longer crushed him completely. Stallone's support had given him a sliver of hope, and the solidarity from his coworkers made him realize he wasn't fighting this battle by himself. Stallone, meanwhile, wasn't backing down either. After the news crew left, he stayed at the hotel, determined to see this through. He spent hours talking to employees individually, listening to their stories and encouraging them to stand together. "Power like Harrison's only works when people are too afraid to speak up," he told them. "But when you unite, you take that power away from him." Slowly but surely, the staff began opening up, not just about Harrison's behavior, but also about their own fears and frustrations. It was cathartic, like finally releasing a breath they'd been holding for years. One evening, Stallone pulled the janitor aside after dinner. They sat on a bench outside the hotel, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery oranges and purples. "How are you holding up?" Stallone asked, his tone soft but concerned. The janitor sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "It's hard," he admitted. "I never wanted all this attention. I just wanted to do my job without being treated like dirt." "I get it," Stallone said, nodding. "No one asks for this kind of spotlight, but sometimes standing up for yourself means shining a light on the truth. Even if it's uncomfortable, what's happening here isn't just about you or me. It's about showing people everywhere that they deserve respect no matter who they are or what they do." The janitor looked at Stallone, gratitude swelling in his chest. For so long he'd carried the burden of Harrison's cruelty silently, believing it was his lot in life. Now, someone powerful enough to challenge that cruelty was standing beside him, amplifying his voice. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. Back inside the hotel, tensions continued to rise. Harrison grew increasingly paranoid, convinced that everyone was plotting against him. He started micromanaging even the smallest tasks, hovering over employees and snapping at them for minor mistakes. One day, he caught a young bellhop chatting with a guest, and berated him loudly in front of everyone. "Is this what we're paying you for? Gossiping instead of working?" he shouted, his face red with rage. The bellhop, emboldened by the recent events, didn't cower as he normally would have. Instead, he shot back, "Maybe if you treated us with some respect, we'd actually want to work harder." Gasps rippled through the lobby. No one had ever dared talk back to Harrison like that before. For a moment, Harrison stood frozen, stunned into silence. Then, shaking with anger, he stormed off to his office, slamming the door behind him. That small act of defiance marked a turning point. Other employees began finding their voices too. A housekeeper refused to clean rooms until she received proper safety equipment. A cook walked out of the kitchen mid-shift, declaring he wouldn't tolerate verbal abuse any longer. Each rebellion chipped away at Harrison's grip on the hotel, forcing him to confront the reality that his reign of fear was crumbling. As word of these incidents spread, local authorities stepped in. Investigators arrived to interview staff members and review employment records. They discovered discrepancies in paychecks, evidence of unpaid overtime, and numerous complaints filed against Harrison, all of which had been ignored or swept under the rug. The mounting evidence painted a damning picture, leaving Harrison with fewer options to defend himself. For the janitor, watching these developments unfold was surreal. He never imagined that speaking out could lead to such sweeping changes. Yet, despite the progress, he couldn't shake the fear that Harrison might retaliate somehow. Stallone reassured him repeatedly, reminding him that justice was on their side. "This isn't just about punishing him," Stallone said. "It's about creating a better environment for everyone. You've already inspired so many people to stand up. That's a victory in itself." Still, the road ahead wasn't smooth. As the investigation dragged on, rumors swirled about the hotel's future. Would it close down? Would Harrison sell it? And if he did, what would happen to the employees who depended on it for their livelihoods? These questions weighed heavily on everyone's minds, including the janitor's. Despite everything, he cared about the hotel. It had been his second home for decades. Losing it entirely would be bittersweet, even if it meant escaping Harrison's tyranny. Through it all, Stallone remained a steady presence, offering guidance and encouragement whenever needed. He reminded the janitor and the others that change took time and patience. "We're building something bigger than ourselves," he said, "and sometimes the hardest battles lead to the most meaningful victories." Little did they know, the climax of this fight was yet to come, and it would test every ounce of courage they had mustered so far. As the investigation into the hotel's practices deepened, the atmosphere inside its walls grew tense. Every corner of the building seemed to hum with whispered conversations and nervous glances. Employees moved about their tasks cautiously, unsure what the next day might bring. Harrison, once a towering figure of authority, now looked like a man backed into a corner. His usual bluster had diminished, replaced by a simmering anger that made him unpredictable. One morning, as the janitor swept the lobby floor, he noticed Harrison pacing near the front desk. The owner's face was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he flipped through a stack of papers. It didn't take long for the janitor to realize what those papers were. Notices from the labor board detailing violations and potential penalties. For the first time in years, Harrison appeared vulnerable, and it was unsettling to see. Later that afternoon, Stallone approached the janitor while he was polishing the brass fixtures near the entrance. "Heard anything new?" Stallone asked, leaning casually against the wall. The janitor shook his head. "Not much, but I saw him looking at some official letters earlier. He didn't look happy." Stallone nodded thoughtfully. "Change is hard for people like him," he said. "Especially when they've spent so long thinking they're untouchable." The actor paused, studying the janitor's face. "How are you doing? Holding up okay?" The question caught the janitor off guard. No one, not even during the height of the drama, had stopped to ask how all this attention was affecting him personally. Truthfully, it wasn't easy. The constant spotlight left him feeling exposed, as though every move he made was being scrutinized. Yet at the same time, there was a sense of relief. After decades of silence, he finally had allies who believed in him. "I'm managing," the janitor replied after a moment. "It's strange, though. I never wanted any of this fuss, but now that it's happening, I can't imagine going back to how things were before." Stallone smiled faintly. "That's the thing about standing up for yourself. It changes you. Once you taste freedom from fear, it's hard to settle for anything less." Meanwhile, Harrison's desperation reached new heights. With investigators closing in and public opinion firmly against him, he decided to try a different tactic. Damage. Control. He called another staff meeting, this time inviting local reporters to attend. When everyone gathered in the dining hall, Harrison stood at the front, flanked by two lawyers. His posture was stiff, his voice strained as he began to speak. "I want to address the recent allegations," he said, avoiding eye contact with the room. "Running a business isn't easy, and yes, mistakes have been made. But I assure you, I've always acted in the best interest of this hotel and its employees." He gestured toward the janitor, who sat quietly in the back. "Take our longtime janitor, for example. He's part of the family here, and I deeply regret if my actions ever made him feel otherwise. Moving forward, I promise to do better." The words sounded hollow, even to Harrison himself. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some skeptical, others outright scoffing. One of the younger housekeepers raised her hand hesitantly. "If you care so much, why did you hire someone to replace him?" she asked boldly. Harrison's face reddened, but before he could respond, another employee chimed in. "And what about the late paychecks, or the way you yell at us for no reason?" Harrison's lawyers quickly intervened, urging him to wrap up the meeting. As the staff dispersed, it was clear that his attempt at reconciliation had failed miserably. Instead of repairing his image, he'd only highlighted the depth of his hypocrisy. That evening, Stallone hosted an impromptu gathering in the hotel courtyard. Dozens of employees joined him, sitting on chairs or perching on the edge of the fountain. The mood was lighter than usual, filled with laughter and shared stories. For the first time in years, the staff felt united, not as individuals cowering under Harrison's rule, but as a team supporting each other. Stallone addressed the group, his tone warm but firm. "I know this hasn't been easy for any of you. Standing up takes courage, especially when you've been told to stay quiet for so long. But look around. You're not alone anymore. Together, we've shown that fairness matters, respect matters, and no amount of intimidation can erase that." His words resonated deeply, earning applause and nods of agreement. The janitor watched silently from the sidelines, tears welling in his eyes. He'd spent decades believing he was powerless, yet here he was, surrounded by people who refused to let injustice go unchecked. It was a powerful reminder that change was possible, even in the unlikeliest of places. But just as hope began to bloom, a new challenge emerged. Word spread that Harrison was considering selling the hotel. While some employees feared losing their jobs, others saw it as an opportunity for a fresh start. Stallone, however, knew the situation was delicate. Selling the property could mean salvation or disaster, depending on who bought it. Determined to ensure a positive outcome, Stallone reached out to a friend in real estate, a kind-hearted investor known for revitalizing struggling businesses without displacing workers. "This place has potential," Stallone explained over the phone. "It just needs someone who cares about the community and the people who keep it running." His friend agreed to visit the hotel and assess the situation firsthand. In the days that followed, excitement and anxiety mingled among the staff. Would the new buyer value their contributions? Could the hotel survive under different ownership? These questions lingered in the air, unanswered but full of possibility. For the janitor, the uncertainty was both thrilling and terrifying. He'd spent most of his life tied to this building, pouring his heart into its upkeep. Letting go of the past was daunting, but so was embracing the future. As he walked through the empty halls late one night, mop in hand, he allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. Whatever happened next, he reminded himself, he wouldn't face it alone. The arrival of Stallone's friend, the real estate investor, brought a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism to the hotel. Employees gathered in small clusters, whispering about what this new development might mean for their future. Would the hotel close? Would they lose their jobs? Or would things finally improve under fresh leadership? The uncertainty hung heavy in the air, but there was also an undeniable sense of anticipation. The investor, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile and a no-nonsense demeanor, introduced herself simply as Ms. Carter. She wasted no time getting to work. Over the course of 2 days, she toured every corner of the property, from the creaky attic stairs to the dimly lit storage rooms, taking notes and asking questions. More importantly, she listened. She spoke with each employee individually, giving them space to share their thoughts without judgment. When it was the janitor's turn to meet with her, he found himself surprisingly nervous. Sitting across from Ms. Carter in the hotel's tiny break room, he fidgeted with his hands, unsure where to begin. Sensing his discomfort, she leaned forward slightly, her expression soft but attentive. "Take your time," she said gently. "I'm here to understand, not to judge." Encouraged by her tone, the janitor began to talk. He told her about his decades at the hotel, the pride he once felt in keeping it spotless, and how that pride had slowly eroded under Harrison's harsh treatment. He admitted that while he loved the building itself, the memories embedded in its walls, he wasn't sure he could stay if the environment didn't change. Ms. Carter nodded thoughtfully, jotting down notes as he spoke. When he finished, she looked him straight in the eye. "Thank you for sharing that," she said sincerely. "Places like this aren't just buildings, they're communities. And communities thrive when people feel valued. That's something I intend to prioritize moving forward." Her words lingered in the janitor's mind long after their meeting ended. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a different kind of life. One where he wasn't afraid to walk into work each morning. One where his efforts were recognized rather than dismissed. It was a fragile hope, but it was enough to keep him going. Meanwhile, Stallone continued to play a pivotal role in shaping the hotel's transition. He worked closely with Ms. Carter, offering insights based on his observations over the past weeks. Together, they drafted a plan to revitalize not only the physical structure of the hotel, but also its culture. Ideas flowed freely, renovating outdated facilities, introducing fairer pay scales, and implementing programs to support employees' well-being. Stallone even suggested hosting community events to reconnect the hotel with the town, a nod to its history as a welcoming stop for travelers. Harrison, meanwhile, remained a shadowy figure during these discussions. Though technically still the owner, he had retreated into his office, avoiding both staff and visitors. Rumors circulated that he was negotiating the sale of the hotel behind closed doors, though no official announcement had been made. Some speculated he was trying to salvage whatever reputation he had left. Others believed he simply wanted to cut his losses and disappear. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light through the lobby windows, Stallone found the janitor tidying up near the reception desk. "How are you holding up?" he asked, his voice low so as not to disturb the quiet hum of activity around them. The janitor paused, leaning on his mop handle. "Better," he admitted. "It feels lighter here now, like maybe we're actually moving toward something good." Stallone smiled faintly. "That's because we are. But remember, this isn't just about fixing a place, it's about healing people. You've carried so much weight for so long, let yourself breathe a little." The janitor nodded, gratitude swelling in his chest. Stallone's presence had been a lifeline throughout this chaotic journey. His unwavering support reminded everyone involved that they weren't fighting alone, that sometimes all it took was one person stepping up to spark meaningful change. As the week drew to a close, Ms. Carter called a meeting with the entire staff. Standing in the same dining hall where Harrison had tried and failed to smooth over his misdeeds, she addressed the group with clarity and purpose. "First, let me say thank you," she began, her voice steady and sincere. "Thank you for opening your doors to me, for trusting me with your stories, and for continuing to show up every day despite everything you've faced." She went on to outline her vision for the hotel's future. Renovations would begin within months, starting with updates to guest rooms and common areas. Employee contracts would be reviewed to ensure fair wages and benefits. A suggestion box would be installed, allowing staff to voice concerns or ideas anonymously. Most importantly, she emphasized, respect and collaboration would be at the heart of everything moving forward. The room erupted in applause, relief washing over the faces of those who had endured years of neglect and mistreatment. Even the most skeptical among them couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. For the first time in ages, the hotel felt alive, not just as a business, but as a place where people mattered. After the meeting, Stallone pulled Ms. Carter aside. "You handled that beautifully," he said, clapping her on the shoulder. She chuckled modestly. "It's easy to sound good when you genuinely care. Besides, none of this would have happened without you stepping in." Stallone shook his head. "This isn't my victory. It belongs to everyone who refused to stay silent. I just helped shine a light on what was already there." With the groundwork laid for a brighter future, attention turned to the final hurdle, officially transferring ownership of the hotel. Harrison, realizing he had no choice but to step aside, reluctantly signed over the deed to Ms. Carter. As part of the agreement, he agreed to sever ties completely, leaving town shortly thereafter. Few mourned his departure. Instead, it marked the beginning of a new chapter for the hotel and its employees. For the janitor, watching Harrison leave was surreal. The man who had loomed so large in his life for so many years was now gone, reduced to a distant memory. It wasn't closure exactly, at least not yet, but it was progress. And for now, that was enough. As the staff celebrated their hard-won victory with cake and laughter in the courtyard, Stallone stood quietly off to the side, watching the scene unfold. He knew his role in this story was coming to an end. Before long, he'd return to his own world, leaving behind the lives he had touched. But as he glanced at the janitor, smiling and chatting with colleagues, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Sometimes even the smallest acts of courage could ripple outward, creating waves of change far beyond what anyone imagined. And so, the hotel entered a new era, not perfect perhaps, but filled with promise. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but for the first time in years it felt worth traveling. With Harrison officially gone and Ms. Carter now at the helm, the hotel began to transform, not just in appearance but in spirit. The renovations started slowly, with small changes that brought immediate joy to both employees and guests. Fresh paint brightened the once dull walls, new light fixtures replaced the flickering ones, and potted plants added a touch of life to the lobby. For the first time in years, the hotel felt welcoming, not just to visitors, but to the people who worked there too. The janitor noticed these changes more than anyone else. He had spent decades tending to every nook and cranny of the building, knowing its flaws as intimately as he knew his own reflection. Now, walking through the halls, he could see the potential Ms. Carter and Stallone had spoken about coming to life before his eyes. It wasn't just the physical upgrades, it was the shift in energy. Employees smiled more often, exchanged greetings without hesitation, and even lingered in the break room to share stories. The oppressive cloud that Harrison had cast over the place seemed to lift with each passing day, but change didn't come without challenges. Some employees worried about how they'd adapt to the new systems Ms. Carter introduced. Timesheets went digital, schedules became stricter, and performance reviews were implemented to ensure accountability. At first, these adjustments felt daunting, especially for older staff members like the janitor who weren't used to such structure. Yet Ms. Carter made sure to ease the transition. She held training sessions, encouraged questions, and reassured everyone that mistakes wouldn't be punished. They'd be opportunities to learn. Stallone stayed involved during this period, checking in regularly via phone calls and occasional visits. Though he couldn't stay indefinitely, his presence continued to inspire confidence. One afternoon he stopped by while the janitor was sweeping near the entrance. "How's it going?" Stallone asked, leaning casually against the doorway. "It's different," the janitor replied, pausing mid-sweep. "Good different, though. Feels like we're building something real this time." Stallone grinned. "That's what happens when you replace fear with trust. people start believing in themselves and each other. The janitor nodded, reflecting on how much had shifted since Stallone first arrived. Before, he'd been hesitant to speak up, let alone dream of a better workplace. Now he found himself participating in team meetings, offering suggestions and even mentoring newer hires. It was empowering, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. Meanwhile, Ms. Carter focused on restoring the hotel's reputation within the community. Under Harrison's ownership, locals had grown wary of the establishment, viewing it as outdated and unwelcoming. To combat this perception, she organized events aimed at reconnecting with residents. There were art exhibits featuring local painters, live music nights showcasing regional talent, and charity drives to support nearby shelters. These efforts not only drew crowds back to the hotel but also fostered goodwill among townsfolk. One particularly memorable event was a staff appreciation night, where employees were celebrated for their hard work and dedication. Guests mingled with workers, learning their stories and expressing gratitude for keeping the hotel running smoothly. The janitor stood awkwardly at first, unused to being the center of attention. But as guest after guest thanked him for his years of service, he felt a warmth spread through his chest. For so long he'd believed his contributions went unnoticed. Now, surrounded by people genuinely appreciative of his efforts, he realized how wrong he'd been. As weeks turned into months, the hotel blossomed into a thriving hub of activity. Room bookings increased, positive reviews poured in, and morale among the staff soared. Even the younger workers, initially skeptical of change, embraced the new culture Ms. Carter cultivated. They formed friendships across departments, collaborated on projects, and took pride in contributing to the hotel's success. For the janitor, one moment stood out above all others. During a quiet evening shift, he overheard two housekeepers chatting near the supply closet. "You know," one said, "this place feels like home now. I don't dread coming to work anymore." Her friend nodded in agreement. "Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you actually feel valued." Those words stuck with the janitor long after the conversation ended. They reminded him why the fight had been worth it. Not just for himself, but for everyone who walked through the hotel doors. Change wasn't easy, but it was possible, and when done right, it could heal wounds that ran deeper than anyone realized. Still, Stallone knew the journey wasn't entirely complete. Before leaving town for good, he arranged one final gesture, a scholarship fund designed to support low-income workers seeking education or training. Inspired by the resilience he'd witnessed among the hotel staff, he named it after the janitor, honoring his quiet strength and perseverance. When the announcement was made during a staff meeting, the janitor sat stunned, tears streaming down his face. "I don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice trembling. "This is more than I ever dreamed." Stallone stepped forward, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You deserve every bit of it," he said firmly. "And remember, this isn't the end. It's just the beginning. For you, for this hotel, and for anyone willing to stand up for what's right." As Stallone prepared to depart, the entire staff gathered outside to bid him farewell. There were hugs, handshakes, and heartfelt thanks, all signs of the impact he'd made in such a short time. Watching him drive away, the janitor felt a mix of sadness and gratitude. Though Stallone's role in their story had ended, his influence would linger forever. In the months that followed, the hotel continued to thrive under Ms. Carter's leadership. The janitor remained a cornerstone of the operation, beloved by colleagues and guests alike. His mop and bucket became symbols of dedication and hope, reminders that even the smallest acts of care could leave a lasting impression. And so, the hotel entered a new era, one defined not by fear or neglect, but by respect, unity, and purpose. It wasn't perfect, nor was it free of challenges, but for the first time in decades, it felt like a place where dreams could take root and grow. Months turned into a year, and the hotel transformed in ways no one could have predicted. What was once a crumbling relic of neglect had become a beacon of hope, not just for its employees, but for the entire town. The renovations weren't flashy or extravagant. Instead, they reflected warmth and character, breathing new life into the building's original charm. Guests raved about the cozy atmosphere, the friendly staff, and the sense that they were stepping into a place with a soul. For the janitor, life settled into a rhythm he hadn't known in decades. Each morning, he arrived at the hotel before sunrise, just as he always had. But now his work felt lighter, less like a burden and more like a purpose. The floors gleamed under his care, the brass fixtures sparkled, and the air smelled fresh and inviting. He took pride in knowing that his efforts contributed to something greater than himself. The changes extended beyond the physical space. Under Ms. Carter's leadership, the hotel became a model of fairness and respect. Employees received regular raises, health benefits, and opportunities for growth. Monthly meetings gave everyone a voice, from housekeepers to cooks, ensuring that concerns were addressed and ideas were heard. Morale soared and turnover plummeted, a testament to the power of treating people right. One crisp autumn afternoon, the janitor stood near the lobby fireplace, watching guests mingle over cups of hot cider. It was part of the hotel's annual Gratitude Day celebration, an event inspired by Stallone's scholarship fund. Local businesses set up booths, musicians performed on a small stage, and families gathered to enjoy the festivities. At the center of it all stood a plaque dedicated to the janitor, commemorating his years of service and the inspiration he provided to others. As he gazed around the room, the janitor felt a deep sense of fulfillment. For so long, he'd carried the weight of Harrison's cruelty, believing he deserved nothing better. Now, surrounded by laughter and gratitude, he realized how far he'd come, not just physically, but emotionally. The scars of the past hadn't vanished entirely, but they no longer defined him. Instead, they served as reminders of his resilience and strength. Ms. Carter approached him holding 2 steaming mugs of cider. "Here," she said, handing one to him with a smile. "Thought you might need a break." The janitor chuckled, softly accepting the drink. "Thank you," he said. "It's been a good day." "It has," Ms. Carter agreed, glancing around the bustling lobby. "And it's all because of people like you. You've shown everyone here what it means to persevere, to keep going, even when things feel impossible." Her words lingered in the janitor's mind long after their conversation ended. He thought about the early days when every shift felt like a battle against both dirt and despair. Back then, he never imagined he'd see a day like this, one filled with joy, recognition, and unity. Yet here he was, standing in the heart of a place that had once broken him, but now helped heal him. Later that evening, after the crowd had thinned and the decorations were packed away, the janitor found himself alone in the lobby. He walked slowly across the polished floor, running his fingers along the smooth banister of the grand staircase. Memories flooded back, of late nights spent scrubbing tiles, of harsh words echoing through empty halls, of quiet moments when he wondered if anyone noticed his hard work. Those memories didn't hurt anymore. Instead, they reminded him of how much he'd overcome. Near the entrance, he spotted a framed photo hanging on the wall. It was taken months earlier, during the staff appreciation night. In the picture, he stood beside Stallone, smiling shyly while the actor grinned widely, an arm slung casually over his shoulders. Below the photo was a caption, "Standing Together, a story of courage and change." The janitor stared at it for a long moment, his throat tight with emotion. That single act of kindness, from a stranger who chose to care, had set everything in motion. By the time he finished his rounds and locked up for the night, snow had begun to fall outside. The world looked peaceful, blanketed in white. As he trudged toward his car, he paused to glance back at the hotel. Its windows glowed warmly, a stark contrast to the cold darkness surrounding it. It wasn't just a building anymore. It was a community, a symbol of what could happen when people refused to accept injustice. When he arrived home, he sat by the fire, reflecting on the journey. Though grateful for the changes, he knew the real victory wasn't the hotel's success or even the recognition he'd received. It was the lesson he'd learned, that standing up, even in small ways, could create ripples of change. And sometimes, Those ripples grew into waves that washed away years of pain and fear. Years later, when the janitor finally retired, the hotel threw him a farewell party, unlike any other. Staff members past and present gathered to celebrate his legacy, sharing stories and laughter late into the night. Ms. Carter presented him with a handmade quilt, stitched together by the employees, each square depicting a memory from his time at the hotel. Tears streamed down his face as he hugged her tightly, overwhelmed by the love and gratitude surrounding him. Though he left the hotel behind, its impact stayed with him forever. Every corner of the building held a piece of his story, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and community. And though Sylvester Stallone had moved on to other projects, his name remained etched in the hearts of everyone connected to the hotel. He hadn't just helped save a man, he'd ignited a movement that touched countless lives. In the end, the true magic of the hotel lay not in its walls or furnishings, but in the people who brought it to life. From the janitor who endured decades of hardship to the actor who stepped in to make a difference, their collective efforts proved that change was possible, even in the unlikeliest of places. All it took was one brave step forward to remind the world that dignity, respect, and justice are worth fighting for.